The weakness synergy is built around Jaime and his 4-star ability, which causes lineups to swap from normal attacking to weakness attacking when healing is received. This weakness attack state lasts for 5 seconds and causes affected lineups to target the opposing lineup with the most losses and be unable to miss. This will stack a damage multiplier onto the target so that all consequent weakness attacks onto it from your troops continue to do more and more damage until that lineup dies, and you will then have to restack weakness onto a new lineup. So at base, this damage multiplier will be 3% per application. I can probably show it in a report. Weakness here. Probably procced off assist at like 9 seconds. Yeah, assist. The infantry received healing, triggering Jaime's 4-star ability. So just as one lineup will then do weakness attacks for the next 5 seconds, and on the next second they will weakness attack, and it will then add a 3% damage multiplier for consequent weakness attacks onto that lineup. And the good thing about this interaction is when you start healing more and more, and everything starts weakness attacking together, what will happen is they will all weakness attack the same lineup and just ramp this multiplier up to really, really high numbers, and it will multiply your damage to huge degrees. So at base, it is a 3% multiplier, but there is Jaime's weapon, which is a very relevant part of this build. At unlock, it will go to a 3.5% multiplier. At 1 star, it will be 4%, 4.5% at 2 star, 5% at 3 star, and then at 4 star it will be 6%. So this multiplier will be 1.17 times better with the weapon at 0 stars compared to Jaime at base 4 star, but it will be a 2 times higher multiplier at 4 star weapon compared to Jaime at his base, which is by far the biggest difference when comparing to his counterparts and the other synergies in Layla and Sonara. So if you're playing weakness and you're playing at a fairly high budget, you may want to focus on allocating more black diamonds on upgrading his weapon compared to how you would approach other synergies, because especially due to how you can multi-proc the weakness multiplier through multiple lines, you will get a lot more damage out of upgrading Oathkeeper than you would directly, at least, through upgrading Sonara and Layla's weapon. Isn't that simple, of course, because they do interact in other ways, more so than Jaime's does. With special abilities, like Layla's will cause more Cersei procs on Wildfire and such, so it's a bit complicated to do the maths there. But just as direct damage numbers, Jaime's weapon will theoretically be the best to upgrade past unlocking it to base. So in other synergy types, there are typically 2 commanders seen as the primary enablers of the build. In female, you'll have Layla and Selma. In bleed, you'll have Sonara and Rhea. But with weakness, the secondary enabler is effectively the healing that Jaime requires, and there are various means of receiving healing as a secondary enabler. The primary way are Drake, Enzo, and Latz, and they are in effect the exact same commander. They all have the exact same 4-star ability and the exact same stats, just for their respective unit type. Drake's tooltip is bugged and says he stacks 5 times, but it in effect is only 4 times when you actually look at reports, so don't worry about that. But the stats are the exact same. If you check something like here, Latz, 90% inf attack, 90% inf health, 92% defense, and it'll be the exact same for Enzo, 90, 90, 92, and the exact same for Drake as well, 90, 90, 92. So they're all the exact same commander, which makes this synergy type a lot easier to talk about, honestly, because the core engines of the build is just the exact same functionality. So if we look at a report of these, if I go back to that same report here, what they will do is they will stack their defense buff at 4. See that? Then 7. That. Then 10. Then 13. and then now it's fully stacked, they will start healing at 14 seconds. If we look down there, Latz used her healing, and Enzo used his healing. And this effect will now effectively keep the weakness attack state on all the units it affects throughout the entire rest of the fight. Because if you remember, I said the weakness attack state lasts for 5 seconds. The tooltip of Latz, Enzo, and Drake's heals is every 3 seconds. So you see here, this is healing at 14. It will now heal again at 17. That once again, Latz used her 4-star, ally healed, and then once again, weakness attack is triggered on all lineups for the rest of the fight. So when Latz, Drake, or Enzo start healing their respective unit types, they will in effect cause 100% weakness uptime for the entire rest of the fight, up to 40 seconds when it will end. You can also equip these healing enablers with their weapons now. If we go find that. Where's Latz? So at first, this might seem pretty underwhelming, because the thing that mostly jumps out to you is it just increases the defense stacking buff from 7% to 12%. But the big thing about this is it actually now only stacks to 3 times rather than 4 times. So what unlocking these weapons does is it basically means they start healing all lineups 3 seconds earlier, which gives you 3 seconds more weakness attack uptime through the fight. So you will, in effect, with weakness builds, have more damage indirectly just through having higher weakness attack uptime. And I will touch on more specifics of those 3 specifically a little bit later, but just first to cover the rest of the healing sources in the game. There is Hector. We can find him. Don't know why he's down at the bottom here under novice recommendations when he's so hard to get. He will lend credence alongside Jaime with his passive spear health and spear defense to weakness, having a spear bias. I think at max awakening he has 90% spear attack, 92% spear defense, so he's very mono spear focused. And Hector will primarily play an important role in how weakness will be able to counter female because of how he interacts against Salma when she casts actives at 1 second. If he's not into Salma, he will proc healing on all the frontline units at 11 seconds if facing 4-star commanders, unless you're facing Bleed, where Sonara will silence all their commanders and therefore totally invalidate Hector's ability, which is a big issue of Hector that I'll talk about later on in the lineup recommendations. But he is a very good source of healing and damage through that against female, because when he'll heal the actives into Salma at 1 second, he'll effectively be healing into a dead zone, which Enzo, Latz, and Drake won't hit. So you'll have more weakness uptime despite that. Because if he heals at normal at 11 seconds, and you have, say, Drake with weapon, who'll start healing at 11 seconds anyway, you will effectively gain no weakness attack damage at all through having Hector, which is a big downside to him now. Past that, it will be Arslan is the only other commander that brings healing. Once again, full spear stats. This will be 66% spear health and attack, and I think 18% spear defense at 4-star. The issue with this ability is that it only hits one lineup every 8 seconds. So once again, like I was saying with Hector, the problem with this is it will only go off one time before Drake, Enzo, or Latz, even without weapon, will start healing and just cause 100% weakness uptime regardless. So you will only get weakness damage on one lineup for 5 seconds through this, effectively, or 3 seconds even if you have the enablers with weapon. So you'll only get like 3 to 5 weakness attacks and scale the weakness multiplier up to 9 to 15% through him. So from a synergy perspective, in my opinion, he's very negligible, to be honest. I know he has a bit of a reputation as like a free-to-play enabler for this build, but in reality, he really, really doesn't. The core of the build will be Jaime, Drake, Enzo, Latz. And then past that, the only other source of healing will be the Dragon Assist Dragon skill, which is this. So when dragons attack or have follow-ups, which for this build will be tear and follow-up, you have a chance of healing. But once again, like Arslan, it will only be one lineup, and again, it will have to hit before 11 or 14 seconds realistically for it to get any value. But you could see in this report here, it did actually get a decent chunk of value. If I find that again. Where did it go off? 9 seconds? So yeah, the dragon attack caused healing, so B3 had weakness attacks on them, and then that stacked up the weakness multiplier before my Latz and Enzo started actually healing. So when they did start healing, I was ready to do more weakness damage into this lineup I was already stacking the weakness multiplier onto. So it does have some synergy attached to it there. It's just slightly underwhelming when compared to Enzo, Drake, and Latz. So I will probably overlay at this point all the weakness attack uptimes on all lineups. And as you can see, it really will be heavily enabled through Latz, Enzo, and Drake. So the way I would envision this build is Jaime is the primary enabler, and then effectively those 3 commanders alongside him as being the secondary enabler. There's just 3 of them, 1 for each unit type. And now a core concept that needs to be understood about healing and Jaime is that you don't actually need to have any troops healed for weakness to be triggered. This is something I've seen some people be a bit confused about, so hopefully this can maybe clarify it for some people. But you only need the heal to be targeted. So by that I mean if you heal 10,000 troops or heal 0 troops, that it will both work in the same way, and weakness will be applied on both lineups regardless. So here at 14 seconds, you'll see Latz used her lineup. At this point, I will only have infantry dead. It's spear inf, but it's effectively inf cav. I have no Drake to heal the spears. The spears are just there as a buff line for Salma if he had that on the other side. So it's basically inf cav. He has no 4-star Daeron or Cersei or anything that will hit into my secondary line. So it will only be infantry dead at this point. So Latz heals actual infantry, but Enzo healed 0 cavalry. But if you look here, the infantry and cavalry received healing, triggering Jaime Warsoul Awakening skill, blah blah blah. Normal attacks caused by all lineups of the infantry and cavalry will be changed to weakness attacks. So even though the cavalry here wasn't actually healed, it was only targeted with a heal. Or I guess it was healed, it just healed 0, depending on how you want to interpret it. But you will see my cavalry here will be attacking as normal with weakness and stacking the weakness multiplier, benefiting from the weakness multiplier. And this can really be used to your advantage because it means you can deliberately run multiple troop types with multiple healers to stack the weakness damage multiplier on your target faster. And these compositions are most commonly referred to as double or triple weakness, where you will lose out on some damage via your commander abilities, because if you run 2 lines, for example, that will in effect cut your commander damage in half. You can refer back to the video I made on this, or the female synergy guide where I go into a bit more detail on the formula for how this happens, so if you want to understand that better. But you'll lose damage through all these commander abilities by running Inf Cav here, and you will also reduce your stats by diluting your buffs across multiple lines. So here, instead of being like mono inf, I have Enzo in there. Obviously buffs nothing into my front line at all, but you will cover multiple counters simultaneously. So here I'll have counter damage onto his imp front from having the second line as cav, and your damage will increase through stacking the weakness debuff in here in twice, or you can even run it with 3 enablers, so with Drake, Enzo, and Latz, like here. You can really stack that debuff faster and faster and do more and more damage through that interaction. And compositions like this, which are built around multiple healers and weakness attacking with them will shine in situations where you are forced into fighting with multiple troop types. So things like here, where you're defending your city, or if you're holding castles in something like KVK or CCS, or more specifically AC, because in AC you're just getting random troops thrown at you unless you're in the top 2, 3, 4 alliances maybe, and you can really specifically funnel correct troop types into building mono defenses and have the rally leads recall troops and whatnot. But for most of us, that is a very high bar to sustainably play at. So realistically, these multi-line weakness builds will be the cheapest and most flexible mid-spender melee troop setups available to players in the current meta of the game when it comes to, I'd say, defending rallies or solos or castle holding in AC. It will, however, of course, be suboptimal for like attacking in mono formations, which you'll see a lot, like right now at the time of recording in GB and whatnot. Bleed and female, as the other synergy types, will both have massive power spikes when it comes to unlocking the 1000 BD commanders. So from Cersei specifically with female and Jon specifically with bleed, they will just skyrocket the damage outputs of these two builds. But with weakness, they don't really have that interaction with Baelish, Dana, or Night King. And because of that, the weakness's power curve is at its strongest at the mid-spender level when comparing it to the alternate synergies. So at a mid-spender budget, a weakness build will typically outperform a same-size account who is building towards female or bleed, just because of how strong Jaime and then getting healing through these enablers can be alone. The other stuff is too reliant on their premium commanders to really be as meta as possible. I mean, I saw even in the last UC, there was like 12k combat rate accounts with multiple 4-star F5 commanders holding buildings for even like ATD with triple weakness. So like Jaime, Drake, Enzo, Latz, and then Baelish or something. Even when on the account there's 4-star Jon, there's 4-star Dany, 4-star Cersei. I mean, maybe that's arguably suboptimal. But my point is specifically for AC, which is a big part of how people experience PvP in this game, multi-line weakness is really, really king for mid-spender players. Now, as far as the other commander options go, the bulk of the build, as I've said, will be Jaime, and then the necessary healers for your setup. So if you're running mono Inf, you'll want Latz. If you're running Inf Cav, you'll want Latz and Enzo. If you're running triple, you want all three. If you want Spear Cav, Drake and Enzo, and so on and so on. But then past that, you'll realistically mostly want stat funnelers who can maximize your damage output by forcing as many attack stats as you can possibly get through the increased damage multipliers you're applying onto your target. Because of course, if you have, say, 100% attack, that will go a lot further if you're doing 100% further attack through a 60% increased damage multiplier. It's a very simple build in that sense. It's very simple concepts. You stack up the damage increase buff and you try and do as much damage through that increased buff as you can. So the recent release, Patello is now here, and he is a very strong choice for this build. You find him here. I think he's at the bottom actually. At max, he will give 90% Inf and Spear attack and 40.8% total health. And his synergy is with healing, which is predominantly found in the weakness setup. And the way in which he buffs both Inf and Spear attack simultaneously, he'll be very, very good for those triple or double weakness setups, as I've said about. So castle holding and triple weakness, he'll be a very, very good 5th commander. His 4-star can be a bit fiddly in terms of how you envision it. I'll probably overlay the specifics again right now. I can show an example of it in a report also. So here, because I have Latz and Enzo, no weapon, no Hector, it will heal or heal proc at 14 seconds, because Latz will heal 5 lines at 5 seconds and Enzo will heal 5 lines at 14 seconds as well. So Latz heals, that'll be 5 heals in effect. Enzo heals, that'll be 5 heals in effect. And that Patello has received his 10 instances of healing, and he'll be active throughout the rest of his fight for the last 26 seconds because of that. And when you actually do the maths when considering uptime, this is actually very good, honestly, and it doesn't... The uptime maths, realistically, is probably higher because it doesn't account for movement, so the actual amount of fighting is probably lower than the maths specify, but it's hard to be too specific in regards to that stuff. And so past Patello, there will be Winton. You can find him. Winton is a bit awkward because he's a cavalry commander. He'll give, I think, 66% cav attack at max. And he has a silence that synergizes with weakness attacks, so he'll counter female builds through that. The issue is, with these buffs, you really want to run him with a cav lineup. And if you're running cav, realistically, you're just going to be so much better served from running a female cav comp or a female weakness hybrid. So you can run like Layla and Salma, who give massive cav stats, which you don't want to lose out on. And then say Lena with them, and then just Enzo and Jaime. And that will be such a better cav comp than anything that will include Winton in it. Even bleed cav with Sonara, Rhea, Enzo, Kevin, Meryl, or something like that will be better than something with Winton in it. So because of that, he's just in a very awkward spot in terms of the meta of the game, and you won't really see anyone running him because of that, just because he doesn't really have a place. And then there's Peter Baelish, who does synergize with weakness. He was the first 1000 BD commander for the synergy. The problem with him is he's just so situational. So you see here, his whole 4-star ability is built around countering active castings. The problem with this is when you face bleed players, they'll silence their own active castings regardless because of Sonara. So Sonara will silence all allied commanders alongside her. So if you run Baelish into bleed, he will effectively be useless, and therefore he'll be suboptimal even compared to mid-spender alternatives, despite the amount of black diamonds it require to actually unlock him. So whilst he can be run in certain scenarios if you already own him, he really shouldn't be a priority purchase in my opinion, because if you're shopping in this sort of budget, someone like the Night King will just be so much better value for money, however silly that sounds to say, because Baelish will be terrible into bleed, and that's such a problem because bleed is already your counter. They'll already counter you specifically through how Kevin will destroy your weakness damage by stacking flat damage reduction on what you're weakness attacking, and you don't really need help against female because you'll bypass their disarm mechanics because weakness attacks can't be disarmed. So yeah, maybe Baelish can be a good win more commander against female. I really don't like how unguaranteed his value is, personally at least. That's definitely subjective, and I know some people do really like him, and he will work against mirror weakness fights as well, because active castings will still go ahead as normal, of course. And then it'll be Dana as the other 1000 BD commander, who synergizes directly with weakness attacks, and she will be very good as the final cherry on top of a spear build. If we look at her stats here, and she gives 106% spear attack and 40% anti-counter against Inf, plus the damage shields. So she is really, really good. The problem is she just lacks formational flexibility because of this, and she will sort of pigeonhole you into running mono spear where possible because of that. So while she will be brilliant, if you're buying a 1000 BD commander for the first time, there might be better, more flexible picks, something like a Daenerys that you could get in this spot instead. But that will be pretty much it. There's a few other commanders you can run with it. Like Julian can be thrown into certain builds. He's good for castle defending or potentially AC castle holding when you're running triple weakness because he buffs all 3 attacks. Stuff like Rob or Garel are just really underwhelming in my opinion. I wouldn't put high priorities on them whatsoever. But when looking at building a weakness build, there's just so many different variations of what you can do with it, and that's why it's such a common build, because it's so accessible and you can integrate it into so many different existing builds as well, just because Jaime plus 1 healer will by itself be enough to get the vast majority of the positives that weakness brings. So you can really mix and match with elements of female, and you'll probably see that when I show some lineup recommendations. So if we go here, so I'm going to have to list a lot of different variations for this. So for like mono spear weakness, the priorities would be Jaime, then Drake, both are entirely necessary. I'll do Patello over Hector because, as I mentioned previously, Hector does not work into bleed. Your bleed will be your main counter here because Kevin will destroy your weakness damage, and bleed tends to be mono inf, and this is mono spear of course, so Hector getting no use whatsoever against that, it will be hugely problematic. That reminds me of something also actually, before I move off this. Historically, Kevin procced off weakness attacks, but in fairly recent months, I think around when I came back from quitting, this was bug fixed and he now no longer procs from weakness attacks, so Kevin in weakness builds doesn't work at all. I know some people don't actually realize this interaction yet because I've seen a few people reference back to it. But yeah, that is bug fixed and you can't run Kevin with weakness anymore because normal attacks aren't counted or weakness attacks aren't counted towards his 4-star ability. Of course, if he did work, then maybe he could go in above Hector for the reasons I just mentioned, but he doesn't. So this last spot will be like Miranda or something, just pure stat funnelers. But you could also run something like Jaime Drake, Patello, and then do Salma and Annie as like a female hybrid at the end. That works well too. So you have options there. For mono cav weakness, I'd say it would be something like Jaime, then Enzo, and then because of how good Layla and Salma are at buffing cav, you'll want to do Layla, Salma, and then probably 4-star Lena, or maybe like 3-star Rhea as another option if you don't have the epics to 4-star Lena, but just one of these two to be female to multi-proc off Layla in this last slot. 3-star commanders will get 4 active casts when paired with Salma. That is a different mechanic when comparing to 4-star commanders with Salma. I think it's like 1, 13, 26, 39 or 1, 13, 26, 40 seconds on the 3-star commander active castings. So Salma will, despite what I've said in previous videos, bring an active casting for the 3-star commanders, I believe. I hope I'm not misremembering that. So you can fill out this last slot a little bit easier there because of that. And then mono inf weakness, it will be Jaime, Latz, Patello. Patello now is so good for these builds. And Andrea and 3-star Rhea is what I currently run, but you could have something like Chris with weapon or something to that effect in this last spot. You can't hybrid imp with female as well as you can with cav and spear mostly because Salma doesn't give any imp stats at all. It's only cav and only spear attack, and if you're losing out on that 90% attack, it's just really not worth the half synergy for the build basically. But as I mentioned previously, weakness is quite unique in that it will also shine when you're running multiple lines, which is very different to other builds that I've gone over in the past videos. So if you're running, say, Imp Cav weakness, you could run Jaime, then Latz, then Enzo. You want both the healing enablers, then Patello for the Imp, and then 3-star Rhea is what I run myself, because she'll buff both lions. if doing Spear Cav weakness, it will be Jaime, Drake, Enzo, Patello, and then probably Hector, but you can also run Salma in that last spot potentially, because she will give 90% attacks to both of these, and arguably may well be better than Hector because of that, especially into bleed. The problem is there's 4 males alongside her, so she won't get any synergy at all. She'll just be pure stats. And then triple weakness will be Jaime, Drake, Enzo, Latz, and then for me, it will be Patello because of the whole aforementioned Hector not working into bleed thing. And whilst this is what I think, what I've tested in most scenarios too, I would advise you to do your own testing on this stuff because every account is very unique and has different breakpoints for certain stuff because of different stats and different weapons, and it's very hard to apply a one-rule-fits-all ideology to this game at this point, so I'd definitely get out there. If Law's Trial comes back out, test stuff against that. The Rebel groups, despite their reports being slightly bugged, can also be pretty good. You just have to make sure to hit the same one and create as equal a testing environment as possible by removing weapons and whatnot. But overall, this is how I would think about building weakness lineups, at least. And then it will just be about maximizing your damage. So for dragon skills, there will be Tear as the weakness follow-up or flame equivalent with the follow-up attacks on the dragon. And there will also be dragon weakness, which I don't own, but it will add a stacking health debuff onto your target every time 10 weakness attacks go off. So it will sort of work in synergy with the increased damage multiplier by simultaneously adding a health debuff alongside that damage multiplier, so you're doing increased damage into lower health. Dragon skills of weakness is a bit weird in terms of prioritization because assist does have synergy with the build realistically because it will proc weakness attacks. The problem is it will be at its peak value when you have follow-up alongside Tear. Tear will be 100% the first priority. So if I do like dragon skill priorities, for me it will be reinforcement, reroute, rally size if a rally lead only, then Tear. Then it's hard for me to decide between assist and follow-up because assist is better, but it's way better when you already have follow-up existing in the build, if that makes sense, because you'll add more chances to proc it. And you can see more details about assist in the video I did on all the maths and how it works as in-combat army size from a week ago or something. It is a very underrated, in my opinion, skill. The way the in-combat healing will just add more damage throughout the fight by bringing troops back to deal damage. So I'm a bit undecided on how I'd prioritize those two. I've sort of gone back and forth in the past few days. I was thinking about this video actually. But after that it will be weakness as a final priority. Because whilst it is good, maximizing this trio of dragon skill synergy is going to be the main priority when looking at buying legion skills. Then it will be the casino castle skin. If I can find that. I think it's called Water Gardens. Here. So this is what has the weakness synergistic skill. The problem is you need this castle equipped for it to work. And it will be good because it will apply a silence for 20 seconds, which will realistically block 2 active castings from 1 commander. The problem is these active attributes are fairly terrible in my opinion. If you just remember that, 28% reduction, 4% health, 4% defense, and then look at something like Sunken at max. Yes, the reduction is high, but the attack and the reduction sort of comes close to equaling out, plus you get the 30k army size, and whilst it's good, I'm just a little bit skeptical that it should be a priority at least in terms of like throwing 10,000 black diamonds at unlocking it. For me, I just feel like I'd keep running Sunken or something. I'd probably say Sunken for solo attacking stuff at least will be better. Maybe in 7 mil rally scenarios against other 7 mil rallies, this will be better. But just as a priority purchase, I really don't think this is that great when compared to the alternatives at least. I think the ship, especially when you have John and the commander damage increase ones, are just better as equivalents. And again, this is more credence to what I said earlier about how weakness builds will have their highest power spike when comparing to the alternatives at the mid-spender level, because I just think their premium items are way worse than the premium items of the other builds. But if you have everything, you have infinite BD and don't know what to do with it, why not get this? Might as well, right? And then the last thing to touch on will be the synergy counters. I've already gone over most of this throughout the video as is. So weakness will counter female, and it will be countered by bleed. Weakness attacks do not count as normal attacks, so they'll bypass disarm effects and the miss effect on Cersei, because normal attacks, blah blah blah, they're not normal attacks, they're weakness attacks. And the main thing, in my opinion, past that too, for mid-spenders at least, will be the Salma counter with Hector, if you have that, because Salma will effectively increase your damage by letting you heal into a Drake, Enzo, Latz dead zone throughout the fight. So you can pre-stack the weakness multiplier and do more damage through that. So you really counter the female build strength of damage snowballing early on, because you'll heal up their early damage and do more early damage yourself, which really neutralizes that strength of them. And then you'll have Baelish, who reverses active cast. You'll have that Casino Castle skin I just shown that will silence active casts. You'll have a few things that do that. Winton as well will silence active castings, but it will mostly be the disarm and Salma thing. Bleed, on the other hand, will be your counter. This is mostly because of Kevin, because he also targets the lineup with the greatest losses, which is the same as the Jaime tooltip. So what this effectively means in practice, if you don't want to read it and interpret it, is Kevin will stack damage reduction on what you're weakness attacking. So if you constantly have a 50% damage reduction on your weakness attack target, your damage will obviously plummet to a huge degree in that scenario. And Kevin performs so well into weakness because of that. Plus Sonara will silence everything, so all those silence effects from Winton and Water Garden and Baelish reversing stuff will all be totally irrelevant against Bleed. And that's pretty much it. So weakness is in a very good spot. You'll see a lot of players running it. It is realistically the most meta build for mid-spender players, and that's why it's so popular. It'll be very popular in AC because it converts those forced multiple lines into a strength of a build by multi-stacking the weakness debuff. And with AC season coming up in just a week or two at the time of posting this video, that may well be very relevant information to some of you out there.